Hi, everybody. Good evening for you, Adiv, in Israel, and good 11 a.m. to all of you on the East Coast. And I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong video, by the way. We have way more exciting speakers in my updated video that everybody wanted me to play, but my bad. So I'm very excited to have here with me. This is the first time that I'm doing a session where I don't have questions ready. So I'm just going to stare at Adiv for a while, I guess. But no, the reason I don't have questions is because there's so much to talk about with Adiv, whom was a good friend. So I think we will be doing just fine. And we will talk about everything from innovation to COVID to the Israeli economy to the GCC to everything that's in between. So a little bit about Adiv. Adiv came back to Israel after being serving as a lonely soldier. Co-founded one of Israel's most famous Nasdaq traded companies. That I remember, always seeing the signs whenever I came to the area. You cannot miss Ness Technologies logo there on the buildings. He was involved in numerous successful M&A deals and is leading Israel's economy into a new world of opportunities. Adiv has been a leader in the tech industry for the last 34 years. He's the chairman of the Israeli Export and International Cooperation Institute, which led all Israel exports in 2019, exceeding 114 billion US dollars, with over 50% related to the high-tech industry. I will just tell you that when I was working in Israel many years ago, I always felt that the associations, the Chamber of Commerce and others, were always, had great people leading them, but not the cutting edge of the business world. And when a good friend of mine, Yuda Rave, told me that now that the Export Institute is being led by a true entrepreneur, and I think we've seen it in how the association looks like, it completely changed the way I think it looked like. I always used to say, I hope nobody's listening to me, the Chamber of Commerce, the Industrial Association, and the Export Institute were always great associations, but I never felt they were, at the cutting edge of things, and you really changed that. And I don't know how you find the time for that, but we'll talk about it soon. He's also the chairman of the Institute of Technology and Innovation in Israel, the chairman of Elad Healthcare Solutions, Elad Software Systems, and few more publicly traded companies. I know he's involved with YPO, he's leading YPO in Israel, he's involved with YPO in the GCC. He's been working with family offices in Eastern Europe. I don't know, you will share with us or not, is what he plans to do now in the world to help the COVID situation. He's all, and as I've mentioned, he's a founding member of Ness Technologies. He's doing also some philanthropic great work. He's working around the clock, and I can tell you the hours that we have our calls, the guy is working around the clock. Adiv, good evening to you.
Good morning, Danny, and good evening to the folks around the world. As I understand, we have some guests from the UAE as well, and from the western part of the US. But Danny, I must say, after this opening and those kind words, I should retire now. At the peak height of the event, I should retire. Thank you very much for the introduction. But with all honesty and to be humble about it, all I've done, and I had the privilege to do it with all my passion, as growing up, born in Israel and growing up in the States, in a public high school in Long Beach, being exposed and having friends at junior high school from China and Korea. And we used to call them the boat people, if you remember, back in the late 70s, the boat people that came in. Now, throughout the years, when I decided to come back and serve as, through the Lonely Soldier program and serve my military duty, I realized at the end of the day that human are human, and we all have the same needs. And if we will only understand to be able to respect of what we see that will change the world. And that's something I grew up with. So, and the reason I'm sharing that with the guest on this call, because first and foremost, as Danny said, we did not prepare it. I said, Danny, I want to get on this webinar unprepared. Let's have an open discussion. I will share with you some of my personal track record. Again, not to brag about it, just to give you a sense and feel of what I do, not only locally, but what I've done globally. And that's how I build my position in the global economic market. As far as my position at the Israeli Export Institute and sharing it, I was asked to lead it for two reasons. I've been involved in promoting Israel for many years. We used to have a program in the late 90s, early 2000. Danny, I don't know if you remember that. It was led by our belated president, Shimon Peres, and Danny Gillerman, who then became a UN ambassador. We were at our lowest inflection in the world, the way Israel was perceived. So they ran a program, they call it an economic ambassador program. They chose the top 50 business leaders from Israel, nominated us as economic ambassadors. And whenever we would travel the world for our own business activities, either the ambassador, the consul, or the economic attaché would set up meetings that we will stand in front of the crowd and explain and describe what Israel is all about. And every time I would travel the world, I chose to meet the non-Jewish community. Because as you'll see shortly, I'm very much involved in the Jewish community around the world. And throughout the years, I built a true, deep network of friends from the Christian and Muslim community around the world. And what helped me to do it was really my background as growing up with those people, understanding their body language, understanding their home. When I was on the swim team, I would swim with the Chinese guys. I would play with them as youngsters. So when I would travel to China or travel to India or travel to other places of the world, I always felt like coming home. As you know, as Israelis, when we travel to do our global businesses, there's always a culture gap, which does in many sense delays and prevent to really understand how to do the business in the different cultures. So that gave me, after years, I understood that it did give me an interesting advantage. At the same time, as being the first one who wrote the code of the Microsoft products and later on built and was one of the founders of Ness Technologies, technology was deep in my blood. I grew up on that. And the Jewish families, if you look back in the 70s and early 80s, the Jewish mother was always proud to have either a son who's a doctor or a lawyer. The tech people, we were the black sheep of the family. Who wanted to have a technician at home in a Jewish family? Didn't make any sense. If you look now 30 years forward, if you look at today, the level of innovation skills, the level of technology that we have presented to the world, every mother today in Israel wants her daughter or son to be in the high-tech industry. Do they want to be lawyers or doctors? No way. They want the future kids to be in the high-tech industry. So we will elaborate on that for in additional way. But if we look at what I've led and done, is always to be involved in strategic discussions, even from a very young position. As I do have, I would say, a very crazy creative mind. I found myself at a very young age sitting on meetings with the government of China, with the government of India, with additional countries in the world, and trying to be in the front of understanding their vision, their needs. That was part of the idea that I brought to the management teams in Israel in trying to shift and change the way Israel is thinking, because we were always startups and entrepreneurs that we incepted companies We thought we had great technology, but it was always technology-seeking markets. And I was trying to change the idea of saying, guys, wait a second. Let's understand the needs. Let's try to predict if we can. And that's why we lost, and we have not succeeded in all of our ventures. But let's try to understand, predict the future needs of the world. And the more we did it, trying to look 20 years, 30 years ahead of time, gave us advantage, and we can really tell some amazing success stories that have been personally involved from inception. This is not why we are here. We are here to try to discuss what are the current challenges of the global world today with the COVID-19, who have really caught the world unprepared, completely unprepared in 2020. As much as we thought that we are prepared, even from a military view, we always had exercises and training for chemical attacks, biotech attacks, and so forth. Theoretically, we're prepared for an epidemic, but no, every single country in the world was caught unprepared, which taught us an amazing lesson. The first lesson, we kept saying for years, we live in a flat world. The physical borders are no longer relevant. Our beloved President Shimon Peres always, in the last 20 years, kept saying the physical borders are no longer relevant. And COVID-19 is proving that. It proved us another layer. It taught us that we're all equal. Again, as a youngster, that's what I grew up on. COVID-19 did not differentiate between colors, race, religion, region of the world that you live. We are completely equal. Rich, poor, black, white, any way you want to look at it, we're equal. So where does that bring us as Israelis? We live in a very small country, 9.5 million people. Our economy is way too small to support all the innovation that comes out of Israel. So from day one, Israel has to think globally. We have to think how we can be involved and be active in the global market, and keeping in mind that we have countries that have no political relationship with Israel. Some countries, in particular in the last 10 years with the BDS, are trying to prevent doing work with Israel. We faced, if you remember, the embargo in the 70s that really disturbed and short-stopped many of the activities of Israel in the global market. And if we look at the numbers, just as I left the military service, 1984, Israel, the GDP of Israel was roughly $6,000 per capita. And the inflation, try to imagine that we had an inflation rate of over 444% inflation. 1984, Danny. That's the economic environment that I left the military, moving now into the civilian market. If we look now, 2020, Israel has no inflation, economy is stable, the GDP is roughly $45,000 per capita. And our export was at that time nearly $6 million. In 2020, in spite the corona and all the global offsets, we've exported over 114 billion US dollars of products and services. And over 50% of our product and services, guess what? It came from the high-tech industry. So since I'm involved, and again, humbly saying a leader in the high-tech industry, we're not better than other people. We're equal. There's no more high-tech, there's no more low-tech. We have to think of it as the innovation part of it, because technology is in every single bone of our life, in every aspect of it. So there is no more high, there is no more low. Let's look at the innovation part. How comes such a...
Do you think, before we'll get to your point, do you think that it's an interesting point, that Israeli innovation is coming because people are willing to take more risks because the country is not behind you like in other places. Like for instance, in the Nordic countries, which have innovation, but you have also a government that takes care about everything you need. You don't need to take risks. Why would you? You get everything. You cannot be a homeless even. So it shrinkalizes really in a way, maybe some innovation. So do you think it's because we live in the Middle East with all of our issues and all of the instability that people are willing to take more risk and are just more into, let's see what happens and not take the 9-to-5 jobs that you see in other places?
I think that, first of all, it's an excellent question, Danny, but I think there are multi-layers to answer this question. First and foremost, you have to remember that Israel has no natural resources. Lately, we found some gas, wonderful. But until then, we had no natural resources. And the only resource we had was the capital resource. Second, from the inception of the state of Israel, and the European families and the North African families who fled to Israel, most of them came without any money. We are the first generation that have started to create our own capital. And as we go through our military service, which is part of our education system, you finish high school, you immediately go into the military service, you're exposed to advanced solution at a very young age, but you're always trained that we don't have enough resources. Failure is not an option, and you cannot unsolve the situation. You have to solve the situation in any way and means, even if you don't have the resources. Add to that the layer of chutzpah that we have, the Sabra type chutzpah, that will, I would say, you can blend it and call it even the secret sauce of the Israeli innovation part. Also, I would like to add to it, with our Jewish background, from 4,000 years ago, we're curious people. We always ask questions. We don't take anything for granted. We challenge our parents. We challenge our teachers. We challenge our commanders in the military. We ask the question, and the phrase, who are you? Look today in the economic business meeting, you can sit in a room and a young technician or a young developer can challenge his subordinate, and they'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. And I know I stopped you, and the heart of the conversation is your views about the future, about the global economy, about COVID, about how to deal with it. We'll get back to that in a second, because I have a couple of questions, and I see, by the way, questions from the audience, but that will wait until we get to the end of the discussions. We'll get to that as well. I have a couple of controversial questions, because I cannot do a session without a controversial question, So, two. One, you've mentioned the Israeli chutzpah, which brings me very nicely to the GCC, okay? Because I feel, and you know how I'm straightforward with what I'm saying, I wrote about it, that the Abraham Accords, and that you'll talk about it later, you have tremendous achievements that you've done in the GCC. But I see, all those weird associations of like Chamber of Commerce, Israel, GCC, all this stuff by people I never heard of before. I think some of their close family never heard of them before, but suddenly there are authorities that are trying to write on this thing. I see banks, I see newspapers from Israel rushing to the GCC, making a lot of noise. And if you're asking me if I'm sitting there, and when I started to work in the GCC, as you all know, by the way, I didn't mention that. How do I not promote myself here? We are doing, and I'm very honored to have Adiv Baruch and the Export Institute as a partner at our upcoming November Family Office Conference in both Abu Dhabi and Dubai. I'll talk about it later on. But what I learned, the more I spoke to families, first of all, I felt that I'm speaking to amazing people. The people that I spoke to in the GCC, and I spoke to numerous families and authorities, and I'll talk about the authorities as well in a second. I felt they are strategic, they are smart, they are sophisticated, and yet our rush, the Israeli rush, okay, let's get things done, doesn't always work well. I'll tell you something. I spoke, and I told you that, with one of the most senior people in the CPA world in Israel, and he told me this. Danny, we came with some companies, tech companies. We came back. There wasn't, we couldn't raise capital. We think the Emiratis or, you know, the folks there took a step back. And you know what I told him? I told him, listen, allow me to tell you, I think you're wrong in two different ways. One, you don't understand the mindset of family offices. It takes time and things, you know, develop relationship and trust. And second, you don't understand the mindset of the families in the Middle East, which is even more so. Shwaya, shwaya, take it easy. You don't just land and say, oh, here I am, look how amazing I am, show me the money. So, so my question is, am I correct that, you know, when you see all this rush going to the GCC, they're missing the cultural differences, and the chutzpah you're talking about is actually not what you should do. You should learn. It's a different world that you need to work with, understand, develop relationship, because you've done it, I think, successfully, and I think there are very few that have. That's a long question. Actually, I could have done it in a second, but somehow it became a 15-minute question.
Actually, it was a question with an answer in the question. You know, you remind me of the story, Danny, that a son comes home and he sits for dinner with his father, and the son started asking the question. He said, Father, what, we learned about the theory of Einstein. What is the theory of Einstein? So the father, well, I don't know. Kept asking, you know, numerous questions, and the father said, well, I don't know. So the mother felt uncomfortable. He said, son, can you please stop disturbing your father? He had a very difficult day at work. So the father got very upset at his wife. Said, wife, please, let him ask the question. How do you want him to learn if you won't ask the question? So you were asking and answering, but to look at the fact of what you're saying, first of all, the same problem we have all over the world, not only with the UAE, and I will explain. I've seen the same thing because I'm involved in China over 25 years. I've seen the same thing in China. I've seen the same thing in Japan and in Korea, where Israeli would come for business meeting, will speak their monologue, will not really listen and understand. And we have to remember, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. Let's learn to listen more and to speak less. And with the Emirates, I've been involved there for over 2.5 years, even way before the Abraham Accords signatures. And when the Abraham Accord peace agreements were signed, we've realized that let's have the opportunity, because there were about 350 Israeli companies who have worked in the region, but they have worked through third-party partners. There was no direct contact and information. All of a sudden, the borders open up, you can have direct contacts, and here is the gold rush. I called it, if you remember one of my lecture I gave at the GCC, I called it the gold rush. Israelis are now rushing into Dubai as if there is gold on the streets, gold on the trees, and they can find the money. That's not the way to approach it. That is definitely not the way to approach it. We cannot skip a process that I called it a trust buildup. For years, even though there was no physical war between the region, but the communication was limited. And there was some type of perception about Israel. They respect the innovation, the young leadership in the UAE and Bahrain are people that have learned and studied in all the Ivy League universities around the world. They're strategic thinkers. They're very similar to the Israelis. We have more similarities and commonalities and differences, but we have to be patient. We have to be patient by being there, listen to their needs, and what will make it successful for all of us. And that's something I will elaborate when we do our conference in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi. But I'm trying to set up the phrase and the terminology and even to put our execution work into place. And I'm calling it the co-creation generation. Danny, for our generation, it's upon our shoulder to take the responsibility and to lead the economic diplomacy. The train, the economic peace train has left the station. We can change the whole region. But it's not just about trading or selling or raising capital from their region. What will make the difference is by all of us to think of co-creation. We have the same challenges. We're small countries that we have to fit and to meet the global challenges. And to give you an example, they cover strategy in the space called food security, realizing that in 2050, and that was the same challenge we've put in front of us 5 years ago, that in 2050, the world will grow to about 10 billion people in population. Right now, we're about 7.8 billion population of the globus. That means that the food consumption is going to increase by 70%. The life expectancy is growing. The resources of land, water, energy are becoming scarce, and we have to supply food to a growing population. So in Israel, what we've done, and most of our innovation came from scarcity, since we don't have the, blooming the desert and so forth. The UAE is importing roughly 98% of the food consumption is being imported. So they have set up 2 companies that have acquired over 440,000 hectares around the world. Europe, Eastern Europe, South America, Africa, and now they need technology and agrotech and food tech technology in order to be leaders in the world when it comes to the space of food security. And this is one of the main items that we can co-create together and to be leaders in the global competition. I can give you many more examples, but what it takes, and we will not be able to skip it, takes a longer process to build the trust and to show that we are here for long-term plans and not for quick turnovers.
And another question before I let you discuss the main theme of our discussion, and we're getting more and more answers from questions from people here. Another controversial question, and now I will ruin every relationship I have with governmental entities in Israel. When I started to work in the GCC as well, I spoke to ADGM and ADIO and all the governmental entities, which I was told should be involved, and they are now. Many of the Abu Dhabi Chamber of Commerce, different associations. And I didn't understand why. When I do a family office conference in the US, I never even think about going to the governmental entities. And in Israel, and then they told me they work with Israel, with all these entities, and I always felt personally that, all these associations I described are sitting in very old buildings in Israel. They're all very gray, like not inside and outside, right? And I always felt that whenever I had an adventure and I wanted to make it work with some association, I was like, oh my God, I see people that's been sitting there for 50 years doing the same thing, very narrow-minded, very slow. And you, a tech guy. And that's what surprised me when when we started discussing our relationship. You went into a very heavy organization, right? Why would you need that? You could have been now spending your time at another tech venture, but you went into an old school, old, heavy export institute, and you made exciting changes there. But why did you need that actually? I mean, tech, you're coming from a different world, and this, and then I learned how much you guys are actually doing and how much cutting edge you are.
I'll answer it very directly. First of all, I'm still leading my tech ventures and partner the largest fund of funds, and I have my education system. As you know, I'm the chairman of the board trustee of the University of Ariel. I'm chairing the Young Entrepreneurship Program, which is the most important program to raise the future entrepreneur of Israel. I'm doing it now for kids at the age of 13, 15. In the last 3 years, in all the global competition, we've won among the first 3 places. And I still do. What I'm doing here, it's part of my philanthropy, because I'm doing voluntarily. And why is it important? Because our global presence and our global business relationship are far more important than a political relationship. And this is part of my return to the state of Israel, to what I've done and what I've received, and to bring my network around the world, my experience for the future businesses of Israel. It is really one of the more and most important roles. And why am I saying that? Because I'll give you an example with Turkey, okay? With Turkey, 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, before Erdogan came to take the leadership position, the relationship with Turkey we had, it was so close that even our Navy, because I'm a Navy person, we did mutual exercises with Turkey. The tourism to Turkey was crazy. The import, export, the bilateral trade was growing. All of a sudden, there is a complete political disconnect between Turkey and Israel. But then guess what? Due to the strength of the private sector and our economic relationship, our bilateral trade with Turkey has rose. And it's still continuing, and it's increasing. And I can show you many examples around the world that we have an economic relationship, even though we have no political relationship.
Great. And again, we have a lot of questions coming, but we'll wait with that for a second, and I'll let you talk about the world with COVID and how you see it. And maybe I'll ask you a question that will lead you there with COVID. I just wrote, by the way, and also want to see what you think about the new normal. I did a post yesterday saying, office, sweet office. I said how I love going to the office. I see you're in the office. I said how I enjoyed going and eating not homemade food. I had a ball ordering not homemade food with French fries on the side. And you see what's going on. I mean, speaking of the GCC and Israel, both are leading the world in vaccination rate. I think Israel, you guys don't have any masks almost anywhere. And yet you see what's going on in India, which is horrible, and in other places around the world. So I'll give you that question. How do you see COVID changing the world? And from here, please take it and continue with what I interrupted you 20 minutes ago.
So I will use from your video, when I read some of the text during the video, you mentioned that you continued, even though COVID-19, you never stopped to set up those meetings, even in the virtual space. Actually, due to my involvement in China, I saw COVID arriving before the Israelis were prepared. And what I've led you, I can show you, it's written. In January 2020, I set up the strategy. I called it the business global continuity, realizing that we're moving on steroids to the digital space. Because all of a sudden, a month later, you see trade shows were canceled, traveling was completely obtained and stopped. But you have to create the momentum. You have to continue the interaction with the businesses. So moving to the global, to the digital space on steroids also expedited our cybercrime, our digital crime. Okay, that's another issue we can discuss because this is another global challenge. But we had to start working from home. We're going to bring the people to interact with each other. So productivity, by definition, in some fields went down. Because at the end of the day, we're a human species. We need to interact, we need to touch, we need to hug. And all of the best brainstorming ideas that we would sit in a room, open some beers, get some tequila, have some fun and music, and come up with great creative ideas. Those human skills, even for the younger generation, they're still a necessity. So what we see for the future, and just working from home, some skill sets will enable you to do it. If you're a service provider, a call center, if you work on its own, it's not a teamwork, it's an individual work. It doesn't matter where you do it from. You can skip the traveling and the traffic and so forth. But when it comes to teamwork, when it comes to interaction, when it comes to teamwork, productivity, it will not be replaced. And that means that in order to save some cost, So at least 20% of your work time you can do from home, you can think from home, but there will always be the hybrid model of the online and offline in the new normal. By the way, we see it coming up in the conference and the trade shows. Just being on Zoom calls, people are really fed up with all the Zoom calls. People are fed up to sit in front of the monitor all day and to speak and to get their eyes burned. Look at the conferences. Look at MWC who's coming up that was canceled. The model will be a hybrid model. There will be the offline conference and will enable also online participants to participate in order to have a greater reach or access to additional people. And that hybrid model will also, as I believe and as I see it, will be in the office space and will also be part of our future education. Because we see now the blended hybrid model of education, that you have the online education and the offline meetings. Because if you do all the education online, you have to be really an autodidactic person to be able to learn, to have the discipline to do it on your own.
Great, thank you for that. So now we can continue with your views about the world, about our challenges. If you want to share your screen, you can do that as well, and then we'll go to some questions from the audience.
It's okay. Let's continue with our informal discussion. It seems very productive, but going forward and identifying at least 5 key challenges that we see going forward. So we spoke about the first one was the food security. The second one was regarding the global heating, the global warming. As we understand the global warming, we see that we're going to have lack of water around the world, and the future wars will actually be on some natural resources like water and so forth. Look at another challenge in the healthcare environment, and all of a sudden you have the need of digital healthcare, and COVID-19 have changed the whole way of thinking of the healthcare services. You want to really democratize the healthcare services. You need to lower the cost and to reach any person anywhere in the globe and to enable them to receive medical healthcare. And today with the new sensors, it could be done. So we will elaborate on the healthcare challenge. And of course, when you talk about the healthcare challenge, as we see that the life expectancy is increasing. That means that you have more elderly communities that you have to serve them. You have to reach out to them because their traveling capabilities are becoming less and less comfortable. So you have to shift all the healthcare services from the hospitals or the community centers to the home care. That's a huge change in the healthcare service with the life expectancy. Another challenge that we say, as I mentioned it, the expedite movement to the digital space. The digital crime is, as we speak, there is a current world war going on between all the major nations, China, US, Russia, Iran. We are undergoing cyber attacks every second. We're talking about over 1,000 cyber attacks per second. If you look at the ransomware in cash that people have paid this year, it was nearly $3 billion just in the ransomware. The banking system is going crazy. You see banks are moving online. The identity theft. The war is going to be in the cyberspace, not in the physical war. So that's another major challenge that we see. And by the way, in every single one of those major challenges that we're talking about, that means that the future skill set is changing very rapidly. And that's why I have the privilege to be involved, because I believe education is a key factor to make any changes in any economy around the world. I have the privilege to be involved at the elementary high school, junior high school with my involvement activities and leading the entrepreneurship. And then at the higher education and what I do with my Life to the Soldier non-for-profit organization that I've set for the soldiers. So saying that all those layers are important because the education has changed. And all of a sudden, you can give an equal education to any person around the world. So we can dive into any one of those challenges, and I can describe and explain how Israel has become in any one of those global challenges a major hub of innovation. Let's take the water technology, the water. Israel has 2 sea sources. One is dead, there was a Dead Sea, and one was dying, the Kinneret. You know, Danny, that Israel, our water consumption, 87% of our water consumption is coming from desalination water and purifying water. 87%. We're the #1 country in the world. And we have an amazing ecosystem for water technology. If you're looking at the healthcare system, Israel has over 1,500 companies in the field of medical devices and healthcare and digital healthcare. Per capita, one of the highest in the world. We have set up innovation around the world that have changed the service for people. I can tap on it and really to convey a main message to all of our partners around the world that what we do, we always do good to the world. It's not what Israel is perceived is all about. We're not a conquering country. We're not a fighting country. We have done amazing changes to the world, anywhere from the USB key that was invented in Israel, through the cherry tomato that was invented. You know, then if you remember when we celebrated 7 years for Israel, I did a major event at the UN, presented 70 of the Israel innovation who have changed the world completely. You know that in Israel, we have over 400 multinational companies who have set up their second R&D center in Israel just to take advantage of our human capital and the innovation capabilities that we have.
Yeah.
So we can elaborate on that, and I'm not sure how we're doing on time because I'm not tracking time. But
at our events,
you're managing the time.
Deal a lot with technology because when we came out of Yahud, which is even a city that in Israel nobody heard of. No, I'm kidding. Sorry, Yahud citizens. And we came to New York and we said, how are we going to compete in the most hectic market on the planet? We said, okay, what do we have? Technology. So every conference we do in the world opens with a tech session. As you may know, we also have sub-conferences dedicated to technology and family offices that we do with the world's leading legal firms in London, in New York, in Toronto. And so yeah, absolutely. This is something that we're very proud of. Maybe a couple of questions that I see here.
Danny, before you go to the crowd question for a second, and to the visitors, I want to mention one thing. And since we're in a family office event, I want perhaps to convey a message because Israel, and I've been part of the group that's trying to lead it and to change it. We are changing our mindset from a startup nation to a scale-up nation. We are now, we have now a generation of serial entrepreneurs that we've been first generation, second generation. We incepted more companies through the process, realizing that the capital money that was raised through the VC community created, I would say, a culture. Too early, exits that are too early, premature exit because of the VC community that had to go through the liquidation event after 7 years, forcing the companies to sell, to go through an M&A for the liquidation event. Family offices in today's atmosphere, they can play a major role in continue supporting the growth of the innovation, because you can see that less and less serial entrepreneurs are reaching out to the VC community because they want to build long, sustainable companies, not rushing to the exit. And that is a message that comes across around the world. And I think that the family offices have a major role today to play in building long-term sustainable companies.
Now, I want to ask you before, to take your crystal ball and tell me where the economy is going, because look at where we are. We're at a pretty crappy situation, pardon my French. When I was a journalist, I remember covering 9/11 and the chain reaction, Chapter 11s that came after that, and all the taxes and everything that went on there. I feel, that with COVID, you're not even at the stage of counting your dead in the sense of the damage done, because you're not even over yet. And something like that has never been seen before. And all the trillions of dollars that was thrown at companies to make things work. And by the way, that's also artificial. Many companies that you see today, even in Israel, are artificially alive because the government gives them money, not because they're actually surviving. So we didn't see what's going to happen with those companies that are artificially on a machine right now. We didn't see yet the Chapter 11s that would come when the government says, okay, party's over, now you're on your own. The crisis, unlike 9/11, unlike other crises, is already 2 years. And we don't even know if India, if Latin America, if what we see in other places around the world will not come back in some sort. Canada is not even close to get out of this. Hi, Harry Bloomfield from Canada is watching us. Canada is taking way longer for various reasons. They're still, I think, in lockdown. UK just, what's the date today? I think they still have 2 weeks to go on lockdown. Biden and everybody will follow, because you cannot invent money. They're going to tax the rich. They're going to tax everybody, everything they can. Somebody's got to pay the bill. Doesn't look very nice. And when you read, when I'm reading the reports from Goldman Sachs and all of that, it seems like business is as usual. I think we ain't seen nothing yet. But I want to see what you think. I mean, one of my guests, Philippe de Gaspé-Bombian, Harry Bloomfield knows him very well. One of the most famous families in Israel, in Montreal and in Canada, told me when we did the interview at the beginning of the COVID, he said, listen, last year is going to be horrible. Many companies, many entrepreneurs will evaporate. I spoke to one of the biggest real estaters in New York. I asked him, you guys are paying an enormous property tax. The renters are not paying. You know that in New York, I don't know if you know that, in New York, and only in New York, there's a rule that if somebody doesn't pay rent, you're not allowed as the owner of the building to send him a letter even about it, because you might stress him. You're not allowed. Do the city give you anything to help you? Said nothing, business as usual. They're asking me to still pay the bills. This is crazy. And I had a point, which I forgot, because when my sentences are too long, I forget the point where I started. But what I'm trying to describe is where we are.
I'll continue.
And by the way, and I even hear from the employees, they don't want to go back to work. They got to, in Israel, by the way, it was also a stupid situation when one of the biggest, I spoke to Baladi, Baladi, the manufacturers, and he told me, listen, the government, if somebody gets 75% of his salary for not doing anything, and I need to cut the salary a little bit to make a living in a crazy situation like that, it doesn't make sense. They'd rather stay at home instead of going back to work for another 5%. So the world is changing. The wealthy are leaving. I see people move to Miami. People move to Cayman Islands. There's a mess. So my question is basically pretty short. What's going on? What do you think is going to happen?
First of all, there is a mess. There is a chaos, but there is some order within the chaos. And yes, some industries will completely disappear because they have not adapted to the new era, to the new way of thinking, and they're just waiting for things to come back to the normal way of doing business. We're not going back to the normal. The world has changed. You have to be very flexible in mind and adapt new situations much faster. Those who will be able to adapt new situation much faster, and that's the advantage that the technology community has, because we live in a world that the generation of technology is less than a year. Danny, catch that phrase. A generation of technology is less than a year. So you always have to invest in R&D. You have to be, otherwise you will disappear if you're not there. The innovation should be a key factor of every organization, of every business in the world. And you see businesses that are booming. If you look at the whole global chain of transportation, of even the traveling that has to be changed. All of those businesses, if you have not adapted to the new paradigm, you will disappear. Now, in 2020, most of the businesses in Israel and some other parts in the world that are involved, even though the revenues were lower, the net profit was higher. And the net profit was higher because you adapted to new businesses and you had to go through some restructure of the organization in order to fit the expenses to the new revenues. And you found out that you can do it much better, much more efficient, and to increase profit. Now look at China. We have the privilege as Israelis always to look 3 months to the east and to see how the economy came back as fast, moving to the new normal, increasing. The prediction, and we see that, even our prediction, the global economy in 2021 will increase. If it was a negative growth in 2020, it will be a positive growth, about 6% in 2021, and it will continue in the next 2 years as a positive growth. But you have to adapt yourself to the new way of doing businesses, and you have to adapt yourself to new markets very fast.
Thank you for this. So a couple of questions that I see here. Is Israel conducting any COVAX diplomacy in Africa and Asia? Is it helping poor countries combat COVID-19? Isn't this a great opportunity for Israel to build its global goodwill? I think you and I spoke about India the other day. I'm not sure where that is.
First and foremost, I think from the private sector of the Israeli economy, the goodwill around the world is really part of our DNA as doing so. And I've led a lot of work in the education part, both in Africa, and when it comes to the COVID-19, since one of my companies, Elad Healthcare Solution, we have computerized and developed the electronic medical record in the Israeli hospitals. It's been deployed today in 87% of the hospitals in Israel. And we have shared a lot of the information with many countries that have reached out, shipping some of the ideas and solutions, especially in the education as well. We have sent out a lot of methodologies and pedagogic training so people can shift to the online, because now you can reach out and do it in many countries. So there are many ways that we have done that. We don't use it as a PR. That's part of it. We don't use our goodwill as a PR, but for the private sector and serial entrepreneurs, it is part of our DNA because we are active in the global market. That's one. On the government level, you have to remember that in the last 3 years, we have no government. We are a country that our main practice now is election. We have an ongoing process of election. So we don't have a real budget. It's a continuity budget. From a government level, we have a limitation when it comes to budget-wise. That's why from the Israeli point of view, we're so proud to say that the private sector is much, much stronger than the public sector.
Yeah.
So, but what we've seen, and even look at the situation in Brazil, we got very involved. In India, trying to support and to help by sharing the know-how and sending some necessary equipment that was developed in Israel. But mostly what will make the changes is to share the know-how. And that's something that we do with all of our heart.
Now, the next question you answered, but I will just read it and end the next question after that from the same person, in case you have anything to add. He said it's noted that Israeli entrepreneurs are great at startups, but sell too early, unlike US entrepreneurs who seek to hold for the long term and build multi-billion-dollar companies. Do you agree? I think you have. If so,
Absolutely.
why is this so? I think you explained the VC story.
I explained the phenomena that has forced the early liquidation of companies due to the limitation of VCs. You have to understand that Israel, most of the capital that really accelerated our innovation ecosystem was foreign direct investment. Until 5 years ago, roughly 97% of the capital that was fused into our high-tech industry came from foreign direct investments. Now, some of the institutions are involved, and now it's about 93% foreign direct investment. Yet, in 2020, Israel had the highest peak of investment. There were over 10 billion US dollars were invested in Startup Nation. Over $10 billion. That's was increased from 2019, even though it was during the COVID-19, the peak year of COVID-19. And what I said, the VCs, which at the beginning was the engine, the fuel capital was injected, they had their own limitation. They had to liquidate after 7 years, which created a culture, as I said, of too early to sell the IP. And the way we say it, it's abusing it, because now the IP is leaving the country, and our main vision and asset is to create sustainable companies that will create the job opportunities for the future generation. When I built Ness, we've reached a company of 8,000 employees. And that's every company I'm involved is, as I said, we're moving from the startup nation to the scale-up nation. And this is the stage and era that we are in.
And maybe one last question that I asked somebody asking about the fact that Israel was so fast with vaccination. Why do you think we were so successful with that versus other?
That's really one of the main message that we convey to the world, and that's the reason why the multinationals have set up their R&D center in Israel. Our Israeli culture is to be early adopters. And since we're a very small country, we, in many cases, and being early adopters, we can play the alpha and beta test to the world in many fields. Remember, we live in, I always say, we're the most beautiful house in the worst neighborhood. The situation and the threats that we had forced us to be very innovative in many fields, also in the medical field. Now, for us to be early adopters, we can deploy it very easy in the country. Many, look at Microsoft, look at Oracle, look at Google, they have their R&D centers. They sense and they feel they can do the beta test here in Israel, and then to understand how to deploy, in many cases, same field in the safe city programs, and which move to the smart city programs and so forth. When it comes to the medical health and the vaccination, due to the structure of the medical service in Israel, based on the HMOs, we have Clalit, who is the second largest HMO in the world, the infrastructure, it was very easy to deploy the vaccination. And we presented here that if we can vaccinate a whole community, a whole region, a country, which the state of Israel is like a city in China. And the world, and if we're willing to share the data, not the personalized data, but to share the data so the world can learn and to react much faster, we took that role, we took the responsibility for the deployment. Early adopters, we embraced it, and those are the results.
Great, Adiv. First of all, I hope the Abraham Accords will open a new era in which will all be a one big, great neighborhood and get, I think, more international attention due to the stability in the region and maybe being more mature and open-minded.
Wait, we're having so much fun. What, you kicking me home now?
Oh no, we went through the question. I would love to see anything else that I think you and I had so many questions. I think we should do another session. But anything else that you would like to talk about, please do.
Well, first and foremost, you mentioned that Harry Bloomfield's on the call. So Harry, I miss you. Israel misses you. Where are you? I miss coming visit you in your Jerusalem apartment. So Harry is a dear friend. So hello, Harry. And I'm sure there are some people which I don't see the face about out there. I hope to see you in Israel sooner than later, and more than that, I hope that you all be active and involved in coming to the session, as Danny said, that he's doing a real important role to set up the family offices and to do it both in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, because like we've done our events, is really to bring value. It's for us, the Israeli family offices and the US family offices, to come there, not only to look for their assets, but to bring our bridges and our gateway, to combine the forces. That is an amazing message. It's a critical message, and we have to continue that momentum.
He says, Harry writes, he will come as soon as you will let me in. Harry, I think now Israel lets you in, but Canada won't let you back. From what I heard, you'll need to be quarantined.
Harry, I'm giving you in advance. Just file the application and you're in.
So great. Anything else, Adiv, that we should bring up at this stage? I think we should do another session and keep more and dive into the topic we just very briefly touched.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm here for all of you. Any question, anything you really want to understand on the macro and micro of Israel, will be more than happy to share, because it's really our generation to make the changes. And the opportunity that God has given us with the Abraham Accord to get together with our neighbors, to put together our economic forces to change the region for a global competition, it's our responsibility. If it will not work, it will be our failure for the next generation, and we'll do our utmost to make it successful.
Thank you, Adiv. I will just tell everybody on next week, May 4th, my next guest is Baruch Pierce. If anybody doesn't know who he is and you're in blockchain, you're in the wrong field. The child actor who became a multi-millionaire. I don't know if a billionaire already. I will have a discussion with him next week. Very interesting person. And May 12, we are doing our in-person conference at the rooftop of the World Trade Center. And I'm proud to have Larry Silverstein, one of the biggest entrepreneurs in real estate history in New York, keynote the conference. Gina Diaz Barroso, which is from the Azaraga, which I probably mispronounced, family from Mexico, one of the most well-known families in Mexico, and the owners of Grupo Televisia, which is the largest Latin American network in the world, traded at the NASDAQ. And of course, Abdallah Shaheen, His Excellency, the Consul General of the United Arab Emirates in New York, and many, many great families like Dupont and others. I don't know how to pronounce French, so it's Dupont for me. Mike McGlone, the head of commodities at Bloomberg, will cover the digital world and what's coming next. So it's going to be amazing in person at the rooftop, May 12, New York City. Everybody, thank you so much for joining.
Danny, before we go, I would like to bless our brothers and sisters for Ramadan Karim, and for our Jewish partner around the world, happy Lag BaOmer, which is tonight. And for the rest of you, have a great weekend. And I do look forward to meet you in person as soon as possible.
Thank you. Toda, shukran. We'll see you, everybody, in person, hopefully, soon enough. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.